We will give it another minute. We have a lot of people joining. Okay. So thank you all so much for joining. Welcome to Bhakti Sangha Japa conference call. It's really wonderful to see everyone again. We are continuing our series on Nectar of Instruction. So we had the pleasure of hearing Nectar of Instruction verse 1 last week on Tuesday from Her Grace Kirti Dasundari Mataji. And as we promised, we have a good lineup of speakers. And today we are very fortunate to
Hare Krishna, your voice is dropped. Is that only for me?
Yeah, I think the line hanged.
Oh yeah.
Hare Krishna Mataji.
Yeah. Hare Krishna. So thank you all so much for joining us today. We are continuing our study on Nectar of Instruction, and today we will be covering verse 2. We are very honored to have His Grace Vivek Prabhu, who will be walking us through the second verse of Nectar of Instruction. So thank you so much, Prabhu. You can take over.
Thank you, Mataji. I'll start sharing my screen.
Yes, Prabhu.
All right. All right. Thank you, everyone, for taking your time and joining. It's one of the most important books for a practice for a person who's practicing Krishna consciousness or who is beginning to practice Krishna consciousness. This is one of the best books. Of course, Srila Prabhupada's purports and all of his books are very nice, but anyone who is willing to seriously take up to Krishna consciousness, Srila Prabhupada writes, this is one of the book that everyone must read and try to understand. So I'm not going to share anything new. Whatever I've heard from senior devotees and whatever practical applications, we'll discuss more on practical applications today, because that's more important. Because sometimes we may have a different understanding when reading, but when we hear from senior devotees and when they give practical applications, it makes a lot of sense. So we'll start up with the invocation prayers, and then we'll go into the discussion. Om Ajnanatimirantasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prashtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamin Niti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashyatya Desatarine Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyeva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. I'll get into slide mode. That'll be easy. So before we begin discussing verse 2, I would like to just read a brief paragraph from the preface of this book. I sincerely recommend everyone to buy this book. Definitely there is online resources available, but it's much better reading from a printed version of the book. So I'd like to read, because we need to really understand why Srila Rupa Goswami actually wrote the Nectar of Instruction, and why it is so important that these two particular verses were put right up in the front. Why this has been done by him is written in the preface of this book. So in the preface, Srila Prabhupada writes that this Krishna consciousness movement is conducted under the supervision of Srila Rupa Goswami, and as Gaudiya Vaishnavas or followers of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we have to follow the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan. And in order to really understand, because Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu descended into this world in order for us to bestow everyone, irrespective of who we are, the transcendental pastimes of Radha and Krishna. But we cannot understand that directly. We cannot tap. We may have the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. We may have the Krishna book printed directly. But even if we try to read, we will not be able to comprehend the pastimes of Sri Radha and Krishna. And that's the reason why Srila Prabhupada mentions that we need to take shelter of this book. And why? That's because Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu imparted the knowledge of Sri Upadeshamrit directly to Srila Rupa Goswami. And Srila Rupa Goswami, being the leader of the 6 Goswamis, has this spiritual potency of directly from Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to impart knowledge to all the people all over the world. He has that bhakti potency within him, and he has directly received these. The second part is he has directly received these 11 verses from Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself, Supreme Lord himself. So he's not writing anything on his own. And the third reason is Srila Prabhupada writes in the preface that in spiritual affairs, the first duty for a sadhaka or a person who's aspiring to become a devotee is to control his mind and senses. So without control of our mind and our senses, there is, Srila Prabhupada writes, one cannot make any advancement in spiritual life. Well, where does this statement come from, right? So this statement comes, again, see, that's the reason why it is said, Acharyavan Purusho Veda, which means that we cannot understand or comprehend the instructions of the Supreme Lord without getting to understand the instructions from an Acharya, right? Srila Rupa Goswami is an Acharya, and Srila Prabhupada is an Acharya, and he's trying to tell us that without controlling our mind and our senses, we cannot understand anything, right? So that is coming directly from Sri Bhagavad Gita, where the Supreme Lord Krishna himself says, Tani sarvani samyamya yukta asita matpara vaseyatra indriyani tasya prajna pratishtita. He says that always concentrate to control your mind and senses. Only then, by my mercy, you will be able to understand me. And simultaneously, while controlling the mind and senses, we need to also engage our senses towards Krishna. That's the secret. Because the previous verse, Krishna says that without controlling the mind and senses, you will not get my mercy. Ragadvesha. So that is the reason it's utmost important that we need to understand these first 2 verses, because without the control of mind and senses, the next set of 9 verses will not make sense for us. And it is a lifelong practice. It is not like we read these 2 verses now and we are done with it. It's a lifelong process. It's a lifelong struggle. And why? The other reason is Sharanagati. Sri Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita 1866, Sarva dharman parityaja mamekam sharanam braja. Aham tvam sarva papebhyo mokshaisami ma suchaha. He says, ma suchaha, do not worry. But when? We have to surrender. But how to surrender? Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport, surrender means these are the 6 symptoms of surrender. Anukulyasya sankalpa, pratikulyasya varjanam, rakshishyati vishwaso, gopritve varanam tatha, atmanikshepa karpanye, shadvida sharanagatihi. Only accepting things that are favorable to devotional service, rejecting whatever is unfavorable for devotional service. Having firm faith that Krishna the Supreme Lord is my only protector and my only maintainer. And Atma Nikshepa, feeling oneself incapable of doing anything independently, always without Krishna and his dear devotees' mercy, we are incapable of doing anything. Even remembering a verse, Krishna gives intelligence and forgetfulness for the right reasons for a devotee to advance. So everything happens by the desire of Krishna. And then, of course, Karpanye, we should be humble. That doesn't come easily. We'll get into the discussion how one can actually develop humility. And by possessing these 6 attitudes, or not really possessing or striving to actually practice these 6 symptoms of Sharanagati, is what is actually called surrender. Surrender means not just giving up all our wealth and going and joining an ashram. That is not surrender. Surrender definition is given here. And based on these items, these 6 symptoms of surrender is directly related to Upadeshamrit or Nectar of Instruction. So we saw that there are totally 11 verses, and the first 2 verses, as we discussed, is first verse is about the 6 urges that we discussed last week, that Her Grace Kirtida Mataji, she very nicely explained how to control our mind and our senses, right? And the second one is what we are going to discuss, the 6 vices, or the 6 things that a devotee should avoid. Why is that? This has been taken right after the first verse, because the first verse, at a glance, if you see, we spoke about controlling the mind, speech, and the body, right? All these different levels or aspects. So we saw controlling the speech, mind, body. So in speech, we should always try to avoid mundane talks. Srila Prabhupada mentions that it's like croaking of a frog, right? Mundane talks. If somebody gets together, they want to talk, right? But if you keep talking some other subject matter, because we are already in the mode of passion and ignorance, we cannot have our focus on Krishna consciousness. And if you read some mundane books, we become what we associate with, right? It's as simple as that. So if we speak and read something that's completely non-Krishna consciousness, Srila Prabhupada writes in the preface of the same book that advancement in Krishna consciousness depends on the attitude of the follower, right? And the reason why we do all this control of the senses and the mind is to transfer ourselves from the mode of passion and ignorance, Srila Prabhupada writes, to Sattva Guna. Because without coming to the platform of Sattva Guna, we cannot practice Krishna consciousness for a long time. It'll be on and off, on and off. We'll feel like, oh, I was actually feeling blissful maybe a few days ago, but I'm feeling so meek. I don't have any strength to even get up and chant in the morning. Why is that happening? That's because we are not vigilantly controlling our mind and senses, following in the footsteps of Srila Rupa Goswami's instructions here. Srila Prabhupada writes that is the prime reason why we need to always take shelter of these verses. And always, I heard from one of the brahmacharis who actually taught us that every day when he rises up, he plays the audio of Nectar of Instruction and keeps hearing it every day as a practice. And I also heard from another speaker that a sannyasi, this is his favorite book. Can you imagine a sannyasi who has controlled his mind and senses? It is mentioned in the first verse that a person who has mastered the first verse can make disciples all over the world. And such a exalted sannyasi reads Nectar of Instruction very regularly. So we can imagine how utmost importance this book is. And controlling the mind, unrestricted attachment to things around us, and how jnanis and karmis are attached to material desires and jnanis are attached to, say, impersonal Brahman, right? And the positive way of getting out of it is trying to think about Krishna by following the processes of devotional service. And then we also saw, because of uncontrolled mind, anger arises. Krishna explains in the 2nd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, while contemplating on the objects of the senses, you develop attachment. And from attachment, you develop, because you're too attached to that particular object, then if that's taken away from us, we develop lust. And if lust is not satisfied, we become angry. So the Supreme Lord explains it very nicely for us. So we need to always pay attention. And anger is not an easy thing to control. So Srila Prabhupada gives that instead of completely shutting off anger, we need to try to use anger in a positive way. Of, say, somebody offends a devotee or the Supreme Lord, at that time, anger can be used. But otherwise, anger should be totally controlled for a devotee who's aspiring to progress, because anger is in the mode of ignorance. If we need to come to the platform of Sattva Guna, we need to tolerate. We often hear Trinadapi Suni Chena Taroribas Sahishruna Amanina Manadena Kirtaniya Sadahari Amanina Manadena, which means that we should, if somebody tells something that's totally against us, we need to tolerate it, because when we become angry is when our ego gets affected, when because we are attached to our body and somebody says something to us, we cannot tolerate it. So from attachment, we lust and anger, same flow as the Supreme Lord mentions. And then in bodily demands, of course, we talked about urge of the tongue to eat more, right? So different grades of eating prasad also. Eating Krishna prasad is the solution that Srila Prabhupada mentions in the purport. So at the beginning stage, even if we want to eat something that's palatable, that's fine. But over a period of time, we should we will discuss that over a period of time we should try to come to simple food also. So that will help us to control the urge of the tongue also very, very nicely. And then demands of the belly, right? So I think in Srila Prabhupada mentions in one of the purport in Srimad Bhagavatam that how to eat is you need to fill your tummy only half full, and remaining quarter should be water, and remaining quarter should be air. This is how a devotee should aspire to eat, not eat to the to our neck full. And there are different ways of eating prasad also, but that's probably out of topic. But then if we can control the tongue, right? Srila Prabhupada mentions in the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita that devotional service begins with the tongue. If one can control the tongue by eating Krishna prasad and chanting the holy names, all the senses become automatically controlled. If we can just follow these two things of eating only Krishna prasad means cooked by a Vaishnava. Vaishnava means a person who's at least chanting some rounds. Krishna prasad means not buying some food from a store and offering it to Krishna and eating. Because it is one speaker mentioned in the very same forum of Bhakti Sangha group that consciousness of the person who is actually cooking enters into the food through fire. So if somebody who's cooking food from who's not chanting or who's not a devotee of Krishna, his or her consciousness enters into the food. In fact, Srila Prabhupada writes this in one of his purports in the 4th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, that just by simply sitting in a restaurant and eating, the consciousness of the people around us, including the cook, enters into the food. And that goes into the person who's actually consuming the food. So it is impossible for us to be Krishna conscious for a prolonged period of time if we are not eating food cooked by a Vaishnava or a Vaishnavi. So we should always aspire to eat only Krishna prasad, either in temple or at home or a devotee's home. If we can do this, the agitation of genitals will be automatically controlled. This is a promise given by the acharyas. We don't have to separately endeavor for controlling genitals. So this is the secret that's been given. And then, of course, genitals can be used to beget Krishna conscious children. That's a positive way of engaging our senses. So that is again a leeway given only to grihasthas, not to other ashrams. That is very clear. So now, having revised this, we'll enter into verse 2. So verse 1, we talked about controlling mind and senses. And now a person is really trying to get into devotional service. Okay, I'm going to worship Krishna and I'm going to follow what the acharyas have told. Okay, somebody is actually taking the first step. But I'm going to repeat what my dear friend devotee who actually explained this in a Sunday feast class a few weeks ago, I'm simply going to repeat what he mentioned. When he came to the second verse, he said, whenever I'm not sure whether it happens in the US, but whenever we are in India, this happens very common, especially when you're in a remote place, you're traveling with so many valuable things. Suddenly from nowhere, there'll be a group of gang who is coming in front of your, say, your vehicle, or whether you're walking alone, a group of gang robbers, they come to steal the valuable things that you have, right? This happens. So similarly, a sadhaka or a devotee who's trying to become Krishna conscious, we will have impediments. And that is the verse 2. Just like highway robbers, that's what he mentioned. I'm using the exact word he used. It really struck me. Just like highway robbers come and steal the valuable things from us, we will have challenges in order to practice verse 1. And those are the 6 impediments for a devotee or a sadhaka that we'll be discussing today. The 6 vices to be avoided, or the 6 impediments. This is explained by Srila Rupa Goswami. Atyahara prayasascha prajalpo niyamagraha janasangasya laulyam cha shadvir bhaktir vinashyati. Once devotional service is spoiled, when he becomes too entangled in the following 6 activities. Number 1, eating more than necessary or collecting more funds than required, over endeavoring for mundane things that are very difficult to obtain, talking unnecessarily about mundane subject matters, practicing the spiritual rules and regulations only for the sake of following them and not for the sake of spiritual advancement, or rejecting the rules and regulations of the scriptures and working independently or whimsically, associating with worldly minded persons who are not interested in Krishna consciousness. Number 6, being greedy for mundane achievements. So we'll discuss each of these 6 impediments or vices that a devotee should always be on guard. So before explaining these 6 vices, Srila Prabhupada explains, first, a devotee should come to an understanding of who he or she is. So he goes back to the basics. So Srila Prabhupada very nicely explains in the purport that there are 3 energies of the Supreme Lord: Antaranga Shakti, Bahiranga Shakti, and Tatasya Shakti. Antaranga Shakti is the internal potency of the Supreme Lord, who is none other than Srimati Radharani or Sri Lakshmi Devi, who is there in the spiritual world. And Bahiranga Shakti is the external energy, or the material nature, or Mahamaya. And Tatasya Shakti is the marginal potency, who are the jivas, who are us, the living entities. And what happens is, the marginal potency or the Tatasya Shakti of the jivas have the choice eternally. We have the choice to choose either to be with Krishna or to go enjoy separately. So that's the reason why Krishna has created this material nature, or the Bahiranga Shakti. But the problem with the Bahiranga Shakti is, we have 3 kleshas. Adidaivic klesha, suffering caused by natural disasters, which is controlled by the demigods, like droughts, earthquakes, storms, like the recent pandemic. Adibhautik klesha, suffering caused by other living entities, like insects, other enemies. Adhyatmic klesha, suffering caused by our own body and mind, such as mental and physical problems that we all have, right? So the jiva, as soon as he comes in contact with the material nature, or the Bahiranga Shakti, the 3 modes of nature capture him. Goodness, passion, and ignorance capture him, and we are entangled by these kleshas. right? We are caught. There is no way to escape these three kleshas apart from birth, old age, disease, and death. So there are 7 problems for us in this material world, right? Including these 3. So there is no solution. But what Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport is that, as in the left side of the image we see, we are just like puppets in the hands of the material nature. When the Jivatma is under the control of the external energy or the Bahiranga Shakti, he is called a Duratma. But in the same Jiva, he comes under the control of the internal energy of the Supreme Lord and Srimati Radharani, he becomes a Mahatma, just like Srila Prabhupada, right? Of course, Srila Prabhupada was an eternal associate of the Lord. He came to the world and he exhibited as though he had a normal life and he had to meet his spiritual master, and then he started a revolution. But this is all a pastime. But he showed through his example that what happens to a person or a Mahatma when he actually takes shelter, complete shelter of the Supreme Lord and his internal energy. Right? We actually saw through the life of Srila Prabhupada what all a person can actually do and serve Krishna when he's actually totally under the shelter of the Lord's internal energy. So this is our position. So with this position, we will get into the actual meaning of each of these 6 vices. So first is atyahara, eating or collecting more than necessary, right? So too much or excessive things that we want to grab and keep hold of. For what? For our own sense enjoyment, right? So Srila Prabhupada writes, possessing too much of food grains, right? Or money. It is explained in the 7th canto. Prahlad Maharaj also mentions, and later when Prahlad Maharaj goes and meets this sadhu who's actually sitting like a python, right? After Prahlad Maharaj actually becomes a king, he goes and meets a sadhu who's actually lying down like a python, and he gives amazing instructions. And he also mentions the same thing: money is sweeter than honey. Everybody is after money, right? How much ever money one gets, we are not satisfied, right? But one should not collect more than necessary, is what Srila Prabhupada writes. Human life is meant for tapasya, tapo divyam putra karyena, because we need to perform some austerity in this life. That's the reason why this bag of flesh and bones is given for us in the form of human form. Otherwise, we could have been some other form. So we need to, it's not that we need to negate everything. We need to reduce the demands of our body, which is bare minimum for the body, but at the same time invest more time, which is required in the human form of life, to inquire about the absolute truth. And Srila Prabhupada gives a very nice analogy of animals or birds. Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport that birds actually, if it sees a bag of rice somewhere thrown in the middle of the road, it comes and just chirps some grains of rice, eats until its stomach is satisfied, and just goes away. But the same bag of rice, if a man or a human being actually sees that, he takes the bag of rice home, he takes a cup of rice, cooks it, and then he stores a bag of rice at home. This is the difference between civilization of animals or birds and compared to man. That's how much degraded we have become, is what Srila Prabhupada writes. So we should not be so much greedy that we should store so much. So what happens is, because we are actually endeavoring to store more and more and more, we need to have, say, for example, we have too many things at home. At a point of time, what happens is, okay, I need a big home now. Okay, how big a home I need? Okay, I need probably a medium size, but then you may not get a medium size home. Then it's kind of an entanglement. So we need to know how much is actually necessary for us to actually sustain our life. And some of the examples that Srila Prabhupada gives is Bhukti Kamis, Siddhi and materialists. Bhukti Kamis means Bhukti means who are always interested in materialistic enjoyment. Nothing but that. That's our sole goal in life. And Mukti means one who's interested in entering into impersonal Brahman. And Siddhikamis means one who wants to attain mystic perfection in their life. That's all they want in their life. And materialists are, of course, a person who wants to gather a lot of knowledge. For what? For gaining a lot of money, for enjoying his senses. So these are all examples of Atyahara. And now coming to practical application. Okay, now we have read this. How do we apply this? So for renunciants, it is said that they usually, if you see sannyasis, they don't even have a bank balance. That's how they live their life for the service of God, because that's how a sannyasi is supposed to live according to the instructions of Srimad Bhagavatam, according to the instructions of Srila Narad Muni in the 7th canto. But then Grihastha Vaishnavas, we need to acquire goods. Of course, we need to work, we need to earn some money and maintain, but not beyond basic needs, right? At one point in our life, we should try to understand. If we are not able to understand, we need to take guidance. Guidance is very, very important for a person who's practicing Krishna consciousness. We should never at any point in our Krishna consciousness think that I have figured it out, right? That's one of the 6 vices that we will be discussing, that practicing whimsically on our own, that, okay, I know that, okay, this much is enough, right? How do we know? We don't know, because we are entangled. We are already entangled, but we are entangling ourselves even more by endeavoring for more money, more sense enjoyment. So if we see that Srila Prabhupada in one of his lectures, he mentions about controlling of our procreation needs, right? In one of the lectures, I was really shocked. Srila Prabhupada mentions in his class, this was way back in the 70s, in Bombay, Srila Prabhupada mentions that in order to even procreate children, you need to get the permission of the spiritual master to even do Garbhadana Samskar. So what to speak of doing any other thing in our life? Even for the most subtlest thing of Garbhadana Samskar, we need to get permission from our Guru. So we need to take our guidance and nuances that we may not even know, some subtle laws that we may not even know. So we need to take guidance for every single step. One of the disciples of Srila Prabhupada, he says, every single step, if we are under the shelter of Guru and his devotees, we will never make mistakes in our spiritual life. We should never become complacent that, okay, this step probably I will do it by myself. We should never do that. So Atyahara, one of the practical things that we could do is accept Bhagavad Prasad alone, like we discussed in the first verse, right? Always accept only Krishna Prasad. Try to not endeavor for palatable dishes, even in the name of Krishna Prasad, after a point of time, right? Because if you start eating too many palatable dishes, that is again mentioned in the purport of the first verse. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says that too much of palatable dishes, one cannot get Krishna, Radha and Krishna. It's directly mentioned by the Supreme Lord himself. So we need to come to a point where, or we need to strive to come to a point where we can live simply. We were living simply until all this Western culture came and all this different kind of palatable dishes came. Everyone was living simple. If we look back at our childhood, we all lived simply by eating simple food. And then for Grihasthas, we can also practice charity by helping brahmacharis, sannyasis, ISKCON temples or projects, local ISKCON temple or projects, or any other. We have so many projects going around the world. We can help by performing charity. By giving, the tendency of taking reduces. So this brahmachari, he taught us that we need to actually monitor our giving, how much I'm giving. Srila Prabhupada mentions we should give 50% of our income. I may not be there yet, but at least we need to monitor how much we are giving every month. I heard from this brahmachari that there is some devotee in the US, every single month, 20% he gives it to his guru for propagating Krishna consciousness, flat. I'm not there yet, but at least we need to practice that. We need to give at least some percentage. And then practice Yukta Vairagya is using things in the service of Krishna, not just negating, but again under the guidance of superiors. Prayasa. Prayasa means unnecessary endeavor, meaning jnana prayas and karma prayas. Jnana prayas means cultivation of knowledge. So the jnanis, they want to cultivate knowledge. For what purpose? They negate the presence of the personal form of the Lord, and they want to merge into the impersonal Brahman. That's their aim. And karma prayas means people who are performing a lot of austerities and performing a lot of hard labor just to gain wealth, endeavoring, traveling long distances for work, traveling here and there, doing 2 jobs, 3 jobs. This is all unnecessary endeavor in the path of Krishna consciousness. We should not endeavor for all these things in order to thinking that if I do 2 jobs or 3 jobs or do some extra things, I will have a better future. That is actually contradicting the 6 symptoms of surrender, because in 6 symptoms of surrender we are saying Krishna is my soul maintainer and he is my soul protector. We should have firm faith in that. Of course we need to do the needful. Doesn't mean that I'll just simply sit quietly and then Krishna will take care of my family. As Grace Radhesham Prabhuji said, simple thing that we can remember is do the needful and leave the rest to Krishna. We should not endeavor too much. So Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport that we should always have the understanding that all wealth belongs to the Supreme Lord, Shri Krishna. Like the Supreme Lord mentions, Bhoktaram Yajna Tapasam. He is the Bhokta. So we need to use all our wealth. For peace, we need to use as much as possible our wealth in his service. Like we may have, we may have a simple home and we have our family to raise. So we can use our money in decorating the deities at home very nicely. Srila Prabhupada writes that you can celebrate festivals at home for the deities, dress them nicely, right? Donate to the temple, buy some books and offer it as gifts to other people. So many ways that you can actually reduce the unnecessary endeavor that are there in our minds. And Srila Prabhupada writes that the jivas have the birthright to use the Lord's property. See, even though Krishna has created this place for us to separately enjoy from him, we have the right to enjoy the Supreme Lord's property. But there is a quota for us. The first verse of Isha Upanishad mentions, Isha Vashyam Idam Sarvam, which means that everyone has his own quota. But beyond that quota, we are not supposed to use anything. If you are using anything beyond our quota, we are called a thief and we are subjected to karma. And we are liable for things that we are using beyond our quota. A practical example that we can get is sometimes if you are staying in the state, sometimes the country gives some extra checks for during pandemic situations or something like that. That money is not ours. I mean, I did not work for that money, right? So we should try to use such resources whenever it comes by the Supreme Lord's grace. We have to use it in Krishna's service, not for our sense gratification. Practical application is Srila Prabhupada gives example of $100 bill. Say, for example, a $100 bill is actually lying down on the street and a person crosses it and he takes that bill and puts it in his pocket and goes away. So Srila Prabhupada mentions that this is not an honest person. The second person, he comes, he sees a similar $100 bill, but he just sees it and he says, okay, why should I bother about it? And he just walks past it and he goes away, right? He neglects it. But the third person, he comes, he sees the same $100 bill, he takes it, goes and finds the person who actually lost the $100 bill and gives it to that person. Srila Prabhupada mentioned this is a person who is honest and wise. So we should be like this. If we find some resource that doesn't belong to me, we need to try to see somehow or the other we can utilize it in Krishna service, not for my own sense gratification. Prabhupada also gives what will happen if we try to endeavor too much in our life. A very scary example of a person who starts labor so hard for his family and his grandsons and his extended family and everything. And finally he dies, and he actually buys a property and he dies. And in his next life, he becomes a neighbor of that building which he brought in. That neighbor is a cobbler. He's born in that cobbler's house. And the next time when he walks past that building that he had got in his previous life, his sons and grandsons beat him up. This is the nature of us. So Prabhupada very beautifully explains this in a very simple example, that we are not this body. So we should not endeavor too much and unnecessarily collect too much and endeavor for too many things. Somehow or the other, we should try to live simple. Simple living and high thinking, Srila Prabhupada mentions. Prabhupada mentions in the purport about Prabhupada's mentions the example of having a land and a cow. Of course, I am not there, but in our situation, what we can do, the disciples of Srila Prabhupada mentions that whatever situation we are, we may be a billionaire, we may be a simple day-to-day worker, doesn't matter. Simple living, high thinking means doesn't mean that we have to give up everything. It is all depending on our consciousness, and that consciousness is given by the third bullet. It doesn't come by our own intelligence. We cannot develop the intelligence to use our resources in Krishna's service, because our intelligence and mind will always tell us, you are the enjoyer. This is your money. You have worked day and night to earn this money. Use it for yourself. Use it for your family. This is what our intelligence will tell. But when we use the higher intelligence, which is Shastra Chakshu, right? Every single day, we have to keep some time to hear from pure devotees. Srimad Bhagavatam or Bhagavad Gita, reading Srila Prabhupada's books is also directly associating with Srila Prabhupada. Every single day, we need to keep 15-20 minutes, a specific time. And when we associate with them, we get the higher intelligence, because they actually see through the future. We may not see our future, but they see our future. And they tell us through the examples of Srimad Bhagavatam, through Bhagavad Gita and other literatures, that if you go this route, you will have this problem. And then when we see that in our life, we see through the years. We may not have the vision of our futures, but when we hear to them, when we read Srila Prabhupada's Vani through his lectures, through his books, we see through our years. And with that intelligence, the decision that we make is in line with Krishna's instructions. That's the only way that we can make and control this atyahara and prayasa. Both are related, because if you collect too much, we endeavor too much prayasa. So this can be negated only and only by associating with pure sadhus. And the third one is prajalpa. Prajalpa is wasting our time in useless and mundane talks, right? Srila Prabhupada writes that if a person, if few people gather together, immediate thing that we do is we start talking. What not? These days it's become a fashion. If two men meet, especially desis, if we meet together, they start talking about green card, this visa problem, that problem, this problem. This is the general topic, right? So Srila Prabhupada mentions that this is like croaking of frogs. So the frog just keeps croaking always, but it doesn't know that because it's croaking so loud, it's actually inviting death, because the snake is there somewhere around. So it is, many speakers mentioned that if we talk too much, we are actually exhaling too much. It's reducing our lifetime. So already we have very little life, maybe 60, 70 years. Why should we waste so much of our time talking unnecessary things in our life? Talking, reading. Prabhupada gives so many examples in the purport, practical examples: watching TV, solving crossword puzzles, reading newspapers, debating on useless topics. Yeah, just like I mentioned about visa, green card, many things. These are all useless topics that we need to try to avoid as much as possible. And practical application is like we should try to not waste too much time in these kind of topics. And then watching TV, this is another big thing, right? Generally, in the name of watching something sattvic, we get into this illusory things. In another book, our beloved Acharya Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he mentions Asat Trishna, which means unwanted association is one of the most impeding thing for a bhakta or a devotee, right? Unwanted association. It can be even watching TV or watching something online or anything. We may think that, oh, this is very pious, they are just showing something very nice, right? But that is actually dragging our consciousness. This verse in Srimad Bhagavatam, we don't have the time to look at it, but it explains that a person who's trying to appreciate somebody or criticize somebody by looking at something, when we are associating with such persons, we actually think that, okay, that is only actually the goal of my life. We become what we associate with. So our consciousness gets dragged, even though it may appear sattvic in a mundane thing, right? So we should be very careful not to get involved in even watching TV into unnecessary temporary things. And of course, do not debate with others, never blaspheme a devotee, because when we keep talking, immediately our mind and senses will try to satisfy our ego. We will try to say, oh, this devotee did that thing, he or she shouldn't have done this. While doing this service, he mentioned this, he shouldn't have told this, right? As soon as we start talking, we find some reason to blame somebody. And that's how criticism starts. And that's the most degrading thing for a devotee. And the last one is, practical application is, we discussed about prajalpa. And we should not, all of these things, the three things that we saw, atyahara, prayas and prajalpa, we should not do any kind of monkey renunciation. Marakata vairagya, meaning monkey renunciation. We should not perform any act of renunciation thinking that, okay, from 2A onwards, I'll just zip my mouth and I'll just keep shut. I will not do anything in my life except speaking Harikatha and not doing anything else. That's not going to work. Because Srila Prabhupada writes in one of the purports that monkeys also don't rest. So doesn't mean that they are completely renounced. Prabhupada gives a very practical example that if somebody is actually passed away, when we go to the cremation area, every person actually gets this thought: life is very short. I shouldn't probably not labor hard like this. I should probably do something simple in my life and dedicate myself. But Srila Prabhupada writes, as soon as the person comes from the cremation area, he goes back to his old business. This is monkey renunciation. Srila Prabhupada writes, it may sound very hard, but this is the actual truth, right? So the actual thing that a devotee should do is follow the path of previous Mahajans. Mahajano yena gata sapanta. Meaning the great devotees of the Lord, how did they manage their lives? We cannot imitate them, but take the principle of their lives, right? Great devotees like Dhruva Maharaj, Prahlad Maharaj, Ambarish Maharaj, so many examples from Srimad Bhagavatam. How did they lead their lives? Take the principle from their lives, right? They had so much wealth. How did they use their wealth? They used all of their wealth for Krishna service. They also had to undergo so much tension in their life. Being a king is not an easy thing. You're responsible for all the praja in your kingdom, but still they were managing everything, right? So we need to gain inspiration from Mahajans and then lead our life. And making prajalpa positive is, whenever we meet some devotees, we can ask them, if we have really good friendships with some sincere devotees, we can ask them, Prabhu, what did you hear in the previous week? Did you get inspired by hearing something? Please share something so that I can improve myself in my devotional service. Just like Krishna explains, right? Tushyanti cha ramanti cha in Bhagavad Gita. So we have to exchange Krishna Katha, or exchange how I am struggling. How can I improve, Prabhu? Please help me, right? I'm not able to concentrate on my japa. Can you provide some advice for me, like that. And then and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also mentions to Srila Prakashananda Saraswati that we should scrutinizingly study Srimad Bhagavatam every day. So this is already been given by Srila Prabhupada as an everyday practice for us. We are running short of time. I'll go very quickly. Niyamagraha means there are two categories: Niyam Agraha and Niyam Agraha. Meaning you have to accept rules and regulations for the sake of spiritual advancement, not for any economic development. Okay. Srila Prabhupada and the Acharyas have asked me to follow the 4 regulative principles, and I need to follow this no matter what, right? Because this is going to help me progress in my spiritual advancement. So there are certain rules and regulations that are provided for what? Like we discussed in the beginning, to control our mind and senses. That's the major portion why this is being given for us. And the second thing is Niyam Agra, because if we simply try to neglect, if I can follow maybe 2 of these things, maybe not all 4, right? If we try to neglect and not observe these injunctions given by our acharyas, then it will be an impediment. We cannot really make any advancement. We will lose taste for chanting. We may not be able to sit long to hear somebody speaking Harikatha, right? We will get distracted very easily, right? Some Niyamagra examples are given us not eating only prasad. It's okay if I don't apply tilak. It's somebody's friend's place. Why should I apply tilak there? I don't probably have to wear tulsi mala now. It's okay if I do the clicking chanting for today. It's okay. I don't have to chant on japa beads. These are all failure to observe shastric injunctions and rules that are given by our acharyas, because they have given some simple things that we can follow every day so that we can actually make tangible advancement in our spiritual journey towards Krishna and Srimati Radharani. So some practical applications is, even though we are not there fully, we should not lose hope, right? We saw in the Sharanagati that Krishna will always protect us, no matter where we are. He doesn't expect us to become 100% day 1 or in the first year or how many ever years it takes for us to actually follow, right? We should never lose hope. Krishna actually, the Supreme Lord actually mentions this in Uddhav Gita in 11th canto in one of the slokas, that even though we are striving to practice many things, the sadhaka still struggles with some sense gratificatory enjoyment tendencies or tendencies to enjoy material things. But still, he should continue to follow. The Supreme Lord mentions. So give some hope for sadhaka like me, right? We should continue to practice. And devotional activities, if devotional activities don't lead to Krishna Prema, then everything is useless labor, right? So we need to always have this in mind, that if you're doing something, is it taking me away from remembering Krishna, or is it taking me closer to remember Krishna? Always have this in mind. And we need to adjust. Adjustment in spiritual activities shouldn't be performed without sanction of our superiors. Like how we discussed before, we should always, any kind of adjustment we make in our day-to-day spiritual activities like chanting or hearing or any other activity that we do, we should not make any adjustment on our own, right? Whimsically, that's what Srila Prabhupada writes in the translation. Whimsically, we should not think, oh, it's okay if I probably not serve the deities today. Let them be like that for a few days. Or it's okay if I chant 12 rounds today, even though Srila Prabhupada writes that it's okay. But we need to always take guidance. If the superiors say okay, then we are okay. Then regularly hear from realized souls like Srila Prabhupada and our spiritual masters, and sincerely follow Vaidhi Bhakti. Or Vaidhi Bhakti means the first stage of devotional service is practicing devotional service under the guidance of a guru, following rules and regulations. So that from Vaidhi Bhakti, from practice of rules and regulations, one can eventually go to spontaneous practice. Spontaneously, we will do things. Initially, under the guidance of Guru, we will do certain things. Okay, my Guru has told me to do certain things in the morning, so I have to do. Like I'm just obeying my Guru. But then later that slowly that will become a spontaneous activity for us. And Janasanga is associating with worldly minded people, right? Who are not interested in Krishna consciousness, Mayavadis, Bhukti Siddhi, Mukti Kamis. We already discussed, right? So we already discussed about association. Janasanga can also be, even though we may not be meeting people who are not interested in Krishna consciousness or really associating with them, we may even associate with people who, online, right? That is something that's a big thing in today's scenario. We may think that we are not really, okay, I'm actually playing it safe. I'm not really talking to people who are not interested in Krishna consciousness. But when we actually associate with people, even over the web, our minds can get polluted. So we need to be very, very careful, right? And practical application is always associate with like-minded people or devotees who can help us water the bhakti which is there within our heart. Like you see in this picture, right? A Mataji is sitting, and then devotees are sitting around her and they are talking, right? We don't know what exactly they're talking, but definitely it's something related to Krishna consciousness, right? We may never know. It can be even I heard one speaker mention, even a beginner devotee can give something amazing that will actually help us in our Krishna conscious journey. We never know who will give the best advice for us. So we should never judge that, oh, I should only sit with a superior Vaishnava, not with a devotee who's just started Krishna consciousness. We may never know who will actually help us probably on a thing that we are actually struggling for many years. And then by practicing and choosing right association, enmity will cease and we will have peace around us. This is practical application of choosing right association, Janasanga. And the last one is Laulya. Laulya means unsteadiness and greed. Unsteadiness is the fickleness of the mind to accept false conceptions and conclusions. We discussed this before, right? Our mind will always keep dragging us because we are not our mind also. The Supreme Lord mentions in the 7th chapter that Bhumi Rapor Analo Vayu Kam Mano Buddhi Revacha, that all these 8 elements, including mind, intelligence, false ego, is actually the Supreme Lord's energy. We are not even our mind. But our mind will keep making false conceptions. Oh, okay, maybe if I get this thing in my life, I'll be actually more peaceful so that I can actually chant. The mind will actually cheat us like this also. If I get this thing in my life, then maybe if I get a job which is actually much more calmer, much more simpler, then I will probably have more time to practice Krishna consciousness. I will have more time to read. I will have more time to chant my rounds. This is all the play of our mind. It is not going to work like that. So this mind will actually create indirectly greed, and greed will result in attaining more material prosperity, and then that is bhukti kamis, and merging into existence of Brahmanas, mukti kamis, and desires for perfecting mystic yogas, siddhi kamis. We already saw. So because of this mind, fickleness of our mind, we will become greedy and we'll get influenced by others. And then we will go into a different direction. That, okay, if you have this only, then my life will be actually safe. Then I will practice Krishna consciousness. So that doesn't work according to our acharyas. We have to, of course, make some arrangements in our life, but not get too much diverted into too much of greed. And then our bhakti gets totally distracted. And practical application for Laulya and greed is something that I and so many of us can relate to is in an office environment, right? There's so much enviousness and competition going around in an office, in an office environment, right? So everybody is greedy to get promoted at work, or everybody is greedy to become recognized at office. Okay, I've done this. I'm really looking for some kind of recognition from my manager or something, whoever it is, right? This is all hampering for our bhakti, right? We should, of course, work in our office environment and do our day-to-day job. If something comes on our own accord, that's fine. But still, we should still assess our situation even at our work. Take guidance from our superiors. Prabhu, is this really good for me? Am I really going in the right path? Do I need to talk to my managers? Because sometimes even in our office environments, managers do understand our situation, right? We don't have to tell that I'm practicing bhakti, but you can say that this is my career goal. I don't want to go beyond this. I would like to stay at this level. They understand. But what happens is, because of this environment that's around us, we get influenced by that environment, and we become greedy, right? So we should try to avoid that as much as possible. And then material prosperity, maintaining only as much as necessary for maintenance, we already discussed. And greediness to satisfy one's senses leads to becoming more anxious, and which results in lust and anger. We discussed this, right? Attachment, contemplating on senses, attachment, lust, and anger. And the Supreme Lord explains again this in the 16th chapter in the divine and demoniac qualities. So in a summary, we saw all the 6 vices, right? If we fail to give up these 6 vices, then our bhakti will be lost and we'll be deviated. Slowly, we'll get away from the path of bhakti. And then the second bullet is, let us decide whether we need to be under the shelter of Krishna's internal energy, or we should be under the shelter of Maya, which is Bahiranga Shakti, external energy of the Supreme Lord. So Srila Prabhupada actually translated this book of 11 verses, which was written by Srila Rupa Goswami Pad, for every single aspiring devotee to take from Shraddha, Sadhu Sangha, Bhajana Kriya until Krishna Prema, right? He wanted every single person, because unless and until one becomes a pure devotee, we don't have entrance into the kingdom of God. So he wanted indirectly everyone to become a Mahatma, if not in this life or several lifetimes, but how many ever years it takes. He wanted everyone who's wanting to practice Krishna consciousness to become Mahatma, not a Duratma. Srila Prabhupada will never want that from us. So there are only 2 modes that we can operate at. Either be Krishna conscious or not be Krishna conscious. This was mentioned by a Prabhupada disciple. There is no in between. We should always have this in mind. Oh, okay, maybe I'm doing this now for some time, but after some time I'll be Krishna conscious. That doesn't work. So we should always remember these and strive to practice these 6 vices. That is very, very dangerous for any devotee who's practicing Krishna consciousness. And this is just a summary. We'll just go very quickly in a minute or so. So we saw Atyahara, accumulating more than what is needed. So the solution is acquire goods, money, only that much is necessary for us. Analogy, we saw rice and the birds, and then the $100 bill analogy we saw. And prayasa means unnecessary endeavor, right? Over endeavoring. Either it could be in trying to gain more knowledge or trying to gain more materialistic things. And problem is, because of this, we don't have any time to inquire about the Supreme Lord or try to understand about him. We don't have enough time because we are over endeavoring too much to achieve in our life. And solution is Bhagavatam verse 10th verse. That if we need to spend only, the verse says that we need to spend only little time for materialistic gain. Otherwise, we are missing the point in our life, because the human body is being given for inquiring about absolute truth. And prajalpa is useless talk, wasting our time and energy. And we should positively engage our talk in Krishna conscious conversation with devotees. An analogy we saw of the croaking of the frog. And niyamagraha means accepting rules and regulations that will help us in our bhakti. And the other definition is rejecting rules and trying to doing things whimsically. Solution is sincerely following Vaidhi Bhakti, which is practice of rules and regulations under the guidance of a bona fide guru. And the 5th one is Jana Sangha, associating with those not interested in Krishna consciousness. We have to vigilantly choose the right association for our spiritual progress. It may not be many devotees, it can be just few, it can be even one, but that one should be the right association. Like it is said that the right association opens a door for liberation. Wrong association opens a door towards hell. right? And analogy is, Srila Prabhupada mentions, Jana Sangami, bad association is like institutions like stock exchange and communism and capitalism, so many things going on. These are all bad association for a devotee who's trying to progress. And the positive aspect is Bhakta Sanevas, like Srila Narottam Das Thakur says, we should as much as possible try to associate with like-minded devotees who will help us in all aspects. And then the last one is Laulyam, greed, unsteadiness of our mind, which will lead to greed. And the solution is by practicing the process of devotional service, we should always remember our true goal of life, right? Not fall victim of our mind. The solution is chanting the holy names of the Lord every single day as attentively as possible, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam. These things will actually help us remember our actual true goal of life and not fall victim of our mind. And the analogy that was given was we should never become Bhukti, Mukti or Siddhi Kamis. I'll conclude here. I'm sorry I took a few minutes extra. Thank you very much. I would like to sincerely thank Her Grace Preeti Vilasini Mataji and Kirtita Mataji for actually helping me to study this verse again, so that I can also practice this to some extent. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Stop here. If there are any discussions, we can have maybe for a few minutes. I know it's very late. I think somebody is mentioning that they have a question.
Hare Krishna, Vivek Prabhu. Thank you so much for such a beautiful class with beautiful analogies and examples. So really grateful to you. Yes, devotees, you can ask questions. If you can write it on the chat box, type it here, or you can raise your hand, then we can unmute you.
Jyoti Mataji has a question.
Yeah. So Jyoti Mataji, please go ahead and ask your question. You said by giving the tendency of receiving is reduced, how to encounter this tendency? You typed it in the chat.
Okay, I don't quite understand. So I think what I mentioned was, I think maybe she's meaning about charity, if I'm not wrong. By giving, the tendency of receiving is reduced. Okay, I think it's about charity she's asking. Yes, Mataji. So generally, grihasthas, one of the items that a grihastha should actually follow is to be charitable. And charity should be, again, we need to know whom to give. The Supreme Lord again explains this in the 17th chapter. There are different modes of charity. We can't just keep giving charity whomever we see in the streets or in the signals. There is charity in the mode of goodness, passion, and ignorance. So Srila Prabhupada writes that in the 17th chapter that charity in the mode of goodness is we need to know the time and place where we are actually giving the charity. So Prabhupada writes in that purport that ideally charity should be given to the Brahmanas. So which means that the devotees, right? So we have so many devotees who are struggling. We may meet them or we may talk to them over maybe a Zoom class. They are doing so much of preaching, and we should help them. We should help such devotees, right? They don't have any income, any source of income. So we should help such devotees. We should help such many projects within ISKCON, right? When we give, the tendency of automatically that goes away, because when we have say money with us, it makes us think that we are the enjoyer. But when we give it in the service of Krishna, right, who's the master of senses, right, automatically the tendency for us to enjoy reduces naturally, because we want to enjoy. But when we give it in service of Krishna, because Krishna is Bhokta, and the devotees are going to use it in Krishna's service ultimately. And we need to also know, if a sincere devotee, if you give him money, he will say, Prabhu, I used the Lakshmi that you gave in such and such service. That person will definitely tell. So such people are true devotees who are actually using Krishna's property in Krishna's service. So when we actually do that, the tendency of the proprietor, naturally goes down. This is mentioned by Srila Prabhupada. So we can do, say, for example, if we are not able to find such devotees around us, another way Srila Prabhupada mentions in the Bhagavatam purport, that if we have deities at home, we need to celebrate festivals. We need to perform puja for the deities. We need to take care of the deities well. We need to make nice garlands for the deities at home. By actually performing deity worship, our sense enjoyment naturally goes down. As soon as we stop deity worship, our sense enjoyment increases. This is mentioned by Prabhupada. So he recommended all grihasthas, all householders should actually perform deity worship at home. This is another way of performing charity for service, for actually serving Krishna. We are utilizing that money that we are getting, serving Krishna directly. And automatically the tendency for us to enjoy naturally reduces, apart from other amazing side benefits of deity service.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Yeah.
Dandvat Pranam, Prabhuji. Thank you so much. This was a great session. I just have a question. You mentioned we should associate with the devotees. How much non-devotee association can contaminate us? Because in the today's world, we just go for the job. We go we meet with so many other people. So any advice how we should restrict from them?
So,
and my second question, sorry, Prabhuji, second part of this question, is it not if we are caging ourselves with us like-minded people, how would we know other side of the world? Does it mean contamination?
I didn't get your second question, Prabhuji. Can you?
So second question is, Prabhuji, just like a frog who is living in the well. So well is the whole world for that frog. So should we not look towards the sea or towards the river, or should we just cage ourselves within that, within that pond or within that well?
Yeah, yes, Prabhuji. So I'll quote what the acharyas are mentioning. Probably it might address both the questions. This is what all the acharyas mention, and our superiors also quote. We cannot negate everything in our life. That's the first thing that we need to understand. This is mentioned in Nectar of Devotion by Srila Rupa Goswami Pad, that we shouldn't negate everything in our life, but we should positively engage whatever we have in our life in the service of Krishna. Right? That's called Yukta Vairagya. Yukta Vairagya means using everything that we have in the service of Krishna. If I have money, I'm using so much of the money, some portion of the money that I'm getting every month by cooking prasad and cooking bhoga and offering to the deities and distributing prasad to the neighbors around my home. Right? Simple examples like this. So you can find so many other ways you can engage whatever you have in the service of Krishna. And the first question about environment where we are going to the outside world, right? The first and foremost thing that all of our superiors mention is, first, we need to be totally shielded and protected. How we can do that? Every single day, we need to chant our rounds as attentively as possible. And hear or read Srila Prabhupada's books, at least for 15-20 minutes every single day, preferably in the morning before we head out to this outside world. Why Srila Prabhupada has put this morning program for all of us, right? We need to find some devotee who's doing this regularly and do it along with them. And then we will really see, even if we go to the outside world, right, we will be protected. And how we can manage the outside world is, even say, for example, I'm also working in the morning until evening. The best thing that we could do is not engage too much into personal talks. Just keep it with whatever we are meant to do in office. Do not inquire about, hey, how are you doing? What did you do in the weekend? How was your weekend? Did you go here somewhere for this holiday weekend? I went there. This is all unnecessary, not needed. Nobody even expects from us. After a point, they themselves will come to know that, okay, this person is not interested in such things. They will not even come to us. There's another way of dealing. We don't have to explicitly say that we are not interested. After a point, people themselves will understand. So the first and foremost thing is protecting ourselves. Because if we are not protected by Krishna's internal energy, which is by taking the shelter of the holy names in the morning, at least chanting in the morning. If we don't have time, all of us may not have time to hear every day in the morning because of other engagements, taking kids to school. There may be many other things, but at least chanting rounds in the morning we should do in the morning. That will really help us. So many devotees have told out of their personal experience that just by chanting in the morning attentively, it keeps us protected throughout the day, because we are taking directly shelter of Krishna's internal energy there. We are not within this Bahiranga Shakti when we are chanting. We may not, I'm not there yet. I don't have the realization, but at least theoretically we need to understand, okay, at least I need to chant every day and then go and do my day-to-day activities. Then we will be protected.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Prabhu, so we have more questions in the chat box. We have limited time, but see if you can address it.
Yeah, I'll do it quickly, Mataji. So two type of name agra with different meaning is not clear. Can you throw some light? Yes, Mataji. So Prabhuji, so two things is, one thing is accepting things that are favorable for devotional service, rules and regulations. And the second one is rejecting or neglecting. Two ways we can understand. So we discussed about what will happen if we accept and what will happen if we reject. And we saw some examples also. Those were the two definitions. And how does ambition in workplace mix with what you have explained in Laulyam? Yeah, ambition comes from our surrounding environment, right? Like we discussed, because we are in a very competitive environment or an envious and a greedy environment around us, that actually influences us. So like we discussed in the previous question, in order to protect ourselves from such an influence, every single day, we have to, as much as possible, try to be under Krishna's internal energy. That is by chanting and reading or hearing. If we can do that, then our influence at office in a competitive environment will gradually reduce. That will also reduce to become greedy. One day we don't chant in the morning, or we don't chant nicely, or we don't hear properly, we can see the difference. It will happen for all of us. Either in the office environment, we'll feel, oh, I need to do more, I need to work more, or we will do something that's probably not relevant for us. Next question is, my question is basic, how to chant Maha Mantra. Devotees say we should chant Krishna's dancing on our tongue tip, but I haven't felt this. Secondly, how to stand firm towards chanting. Since having a toddler, I'm working woman. Sometimes I find it difficult to chant, but when I don't chant, I feel stressed and anxiety. Yeah, the first question is, as a beginner, Srila Prabhupada mentions that there are different stages of chanting, but as a beginner, we should simply hear the Maha Mantra, not try to think about Krishna's pastimes or anything, just hear the sound vibration. We can keep it simple, Mataji, just chant and hear your whatever Maha Mantra we are chanting, chant and hear. That's all we have to do in our beginning stages. And the second question is, I don't have any experience. I understand it's very difficult to chant when we are having kids, but whenever we get time, we have to chant. That's all, Mataji, because Krishna is Baba Grahi. He understands our situation. He's not like a strict master with a stick in his hand. Oh, you have to sit like this and chant, otherwise I'll not accept you. He's the most merciful Lord. So he sees our situation. So actually, this kind of anxiety is a good anxiety. Okay, I'm not really chanting well. I need to take time to sit and chant. Maybe when my child is sleeping, I need to chant now. That is actually a good thing. It's a good anxiety that we have. I had a question. What should we do if we are keeping on getting bad words by other people around us? Tolerate. Tolerance is the only thing that at least I've heard from spiritual master and senior devotees, that even if somebody blasphemes us, we should tolerate. We have seen examples of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He's showing this, and his devotees are showing this. Whatever other people come and say, they blaspheme, they say all the things in the world, they simply tolerate, because that's the only way. Because as soon as we think that he's actually hurting me, we are on the platform of the body. So we should practice this, and this comes again by regular chanting and hearing. It's not an artificial thing. We will make several mistakes, and we will definitely make mistakes, but then Krishna will give some kicks for us, and then we'll get up, and then we'll slowly give up this habit of tolerating when people say something on us. Yeah, okay, I think we are done.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. Thank you for your wonderful session and wonderful question and answers also. So thank you,
so
everyone,
much.
for joining us, and keep your enthusiasm going on the same way. And we'll meet next Tuesday with the third verse of Nectar of Instruction. Stay tuned on the WhatsApp messages. And thank you all so much again for wonderful association. And thank you so much, Vivek Prabhu, for your wonderful class.
Thank you so much, Mataji. Vansha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyev cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavibhyo namo namaha. Thank you, Mataji.
Vaishnav Vrindi ki
Hare
jai.
Krishna.
Goswami
Srila
Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you,
Thank you,
Mataji.
Prabhu.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna devotees. So we are closing the call now. See you all next week. Hare Krishna.